Meet Kang, the universe's favorite punching bag. Regeneration? Sure, he's got that. A superpower that sounds cool until you realize every time his body heals, it feels like he's being roasted alive. But hey, at least it kept him going while a group of elite academy bullies made breaking his bones their favorite sport. The torment didn't stop at school. When their leader went pro and put Kang's mom in the hospital, Kang snapped. He swore revenge. They had other plans. The bully's leader trapped him inside an unbreakable diamond tomb, leaving him to rot for 5 agonizing years, alone, forgotten. But Kang didn't die. His body kept healing and his hatred kept growing. Now, Kang Ji-hyun's back, crawling out of his living grave with a vengeance. He's not the helpless kid anymore. He's something far worse. The bullies wanted a punching bag, but what they're about to face is a monster on a mission. Our story kicks off like any classic manhwa. Yes, you guessed it. Gate opening. You know the drill. 10 years ago, these gates just decided to pop open all over the world, because why not? Through these ominous portals, out came an all-you-can-eat buffet of monsters. Everything from mindless beasts to humanoid devils and even ghostly dragons, because of course the world needs more chaos. But fear not, humanity wasn't left high and dry. Cue the entrance of the Awakened, the convenient plot solution, aka people suddenly gifted with supernatural abilities. Magic? Check. Martial arts that can break the laws of physics? Double check. These awakened heroes became the hunters who turned the tables on the monsters. But for our protagonist, Kang Ji-hyun, none of this matters. You'll see why in a moment. Oh, just getting smacked in the face by a block of diamond, sent crashing into desks like he's auditioning for a Jackass remake. Blood pours from his head like a broken faucet, and his classmates stand over him. Enter the charming trio of bullies, Zapster, Boulder, and Dynamo, names that practically scream, "We peaked in high school." Dynamo, our fearless leader with the white hair, because villains always need white hair, sneers down at Ji-hyun like he's a bug they forgot to squash. You see, in this school for awakened specialists, Kang Ji-hyun is just that guy, the loser with an SS rank ability no one envies. His power? Regeneration? Sounds amazing, right? Wolverine-level badassery, or maybe Deadpool without the jokes. Nope, not for Kang Ji-hyun. His version of regeneration is the universe's sick joke. Every time his body heals, it feels like his insides are being slow-cooked. So yeah, fun times. As Ji-hyun writhes on the ground, his skull slowly knitting itself back together, the bullies laugh it off. Why wouldn't they? It's like kicking a guy who can't die but feels every second of it. By the time he's healed, there's no evidence left, no broken bones, no scars, no bruises. Just him, sitting at his desk, hoping his next death is more painless than the last. Oh, and the teachers, the police, the authorities? They're all looking the other way, sipping their coffee because, well, Ji-hyun's bullies are S-class individuals. When you've got powers over diamonds, electricity, and earth, you get VIP treatment. Kang Ji-hyun walked home, dragging the weight of the day behind him like a shackle. The beaten path to the tiny shop in front of his house felt heavier than usual, but at least his mom was waiting there, his one anchor in this hellhole of a world. She greeted him with warmth, a smile that was probably the only reason he hadn't dropped out of that wretched, awakened school yet. It was a simple life, but she made it bearable. His mom, the woman who single-handedly kept their failing restaurant alive after his dad had died when he was 5, had no idea what a wreck her son's life was. She asked him how school was, and like every other day, he lied. "It's fine, Mom, really. Great, even." He forced a smile, like twisting a knife into his own gut, because the truth would kill her. He couldn't tell her about the daily torment, the bullies, or how he dreamt of wrapping his hands around their smug throats. But Kang had a plan. Once he graduated and became a hunter, even a low-ranked one, He could make enough money to get his mom out of here. They'd live somewhere better, away from the filth and cruelty of their current life. They could be happy. At least, that was the dream. Today was supposed to be special, the 15th of the month, his mom's birthday. But instead of a celebration, Kang stood frozen, staring at her broken body in a hospital bed. His mind could hardly process the sight, her face hidden beneath bandages, her fragile frame hooked up to machines, the neck brace, the oxygen support. The government official beside him droned on about an accident, but Kang knew better. It was no accident. His blood boiled as he recalled the scene. The Bullies, those same smug bastards from school, had come to their restaurant. Dynamo, the self-absorbed piece of trash, thought he could flirt with Kang's mom, showing off his shiny diamond tricks like some deranged magician. When she pulled away, Dynamo's fragile ego couldn't handle the rejection. And when her hand accidentally knocked his phone off the table, cracking its screen, that's when it happened. Hundreds of diamond spikes erupted from the ground, piercing Kang's mom, lifting her into the air like some grotesque display of power. An accident? Kang's fists clenched so hard his nails dug into his palms. Blood dripped onto the floor as his rage consumed him. The official kept rambling, but Kang wasn't listening. His eyes fixated on the birthday cake that lay forgotten on the floor. The cake he'd picked out for her, now soaked in blood, just like everything else in his life. He gritted his teeth so hard they shattered, fragments falling to the ground, mixing with the blood. His fury coursed through him, primal, ripping through his skin as his hands clawed at his neck. He wanted to tear out of this weak, pathetic body and kill them all, every last one of them. In the remote mountains outside the city, the three bullies, Zapster, Boulder, and their fearless leader Dynamo, were chilling after school, flexing their powers like children with shiny new toys. As lightning sparked from Zapster's fingertips, he turned to Dynamo with a flicker of unease. "Do you think it's okay? I mean, we sent an innocent woman to the hospital." His voice wavered. Dynamo, exuding smugness, casually waved off Zapster's concern. "Relax, man. We're underage and awakened. We're basically untouchable. They'll just call it an accident or whatever, and we'll get off with a slap on the wrist. No one cares, trust me." Zapster wasn't entirely convinced. "But..." Dynamo's eyes darkened. "It's not like this is the first time we've done something like this." "Don't act all soft now, Zap." His voice oozed with irritation. Just as Zapster opened his mouth to protest again, a voice cut through the chilly mountain air. Why did you do it?" Marching toward them, the figure's face was twisted with fury. Kang, the very worm Dynamo had humiliated before, stood before them, shaking with rage. Tears and snot mixed on his face, but that didn't diminish the storm in his eyes. "Why? Did you kill my mom?" His scream echoed across the mountains. Dynamo blinked, and then a wide, almost gleeful grin spread across his face. "Oh, your mom! She was hot, man. Shame about what happened, but hey, accidents happen, right?" Kang, trembling with fury, lunged at Dynamo. But before he could even get close, Dynamo casually lifted a hand, and with a flick of his fingers, a diamond spear shot through Kang's chest. Blood sprayed everywhere as Kang grabbed the spear with both hands, pulling it out through sheer agony, his body writhing as his regenerative ability kicked in. The pain was unbearable, but the rage was even worse. He cursed the bullies, crawling toward them. Dynamo, watching the entire spectacle, laughed. "Man, this is sad. How are you still trying to fight?" Zapster, still nervous, looked at Dynamo. "Should we finish him?" Dynamo sighed, exasperated. Zap him." With a roll of his eyes, Zapster summoned a bolt of lightning from the sky. It struck Kang, sending him crashing to his knees, smoke rising from his charred body. The ground was soaked with his blood, but he didn't stop. Even in the face of death, Kang crawled forward, dragging himself by sheer force of will. Dynamo was done playing. "You seriously still want to go?" He raised his fist, now covered in jagged diamonds. As Kang grabbed at his leg, Dynamo smashed his fist down, diamond-encrusted and vicious. Again and again he pounded Kang, a relentless fury behind each hit. His rampage had begun, with fists flying in a chaotic blur. "Shut up!" Dynamo bellowed, landing a final devastating punch, coated in diamond, directly into Kang's mouth. The spike-like diamonds tore through his throat, intent on silencing him forever. But Kang didn't die. No, his cursed regeneration kicked in again, and with each agonizing second his throat began to heal, the hole closing as Kang gasped for air. As Dynamo stood over him, fists clenched, Kang coughed up blood and grinned through the pain. He wasn't done yet. Dynamo had had enough. Kang's relentless crawling, that ridiculous regenerative ability, it was all getting on his last nerve. With a deep sigh, he raised his hand, fingers twitching as if preparing to snap them for dramatic effect. Zapster, ever the jittery sidekick, nervously glanced at Dynamo's glowing hand. What are you doing?" He couldn't hide the flicker of unease in his voice. Dynamo smirked, the glow from his hand intensifying. "Something long overdue, Zap. Watch and learn." Suddenly, thousands of diamond shards erupted from his hand, like a shimmering tidal wave, each one razor-sharp and aimed directly at Kang. The air itself seemed to freeze as the diamonds enveloped him, encasing his battered body like an exquisitely expensive but morbidly ironic coffin. But before the last diamond could seal him completely, Kang's voice cut through the chaos, raw with rage. "I'm going to kill you. I swear to God I will kill you, you bastard!" Dynamo's grin only widened. He leaned in close, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Good luck with that, buddy. If you manage to get out. But hey, no rush." With that, the final diamond sealed Kang inside, and Dynamo dusted his hands off, pleased with his work. Consider it a free upgrade. A diamond tomb. Priceless, really. As silence settled, Kang found himself trapped, lying in what felt like his own personal hell. Dark, cramped, and utterly hopeless. The diamonds pressed in on him from all sides, making it hard to breathe. His mind raced, his body frozen in place, utterly powerless. He couldn't help but think, is this how my mom feels right now? Trapped, unable to move, stuck in a body that's failing her. The thought gnawed at him, fueling his anger. His jaw clenched, teeth grinding. With every ounce of willpower he had, Kang balled his fist and punched upward. The pain shot through his body like a lightning strike, his cursed regeneration kicking in to repair the damage immediately. But he didn't care. He kept punching. Over and over again, his knuckles cracked, bones shattered, but the regeneration dragged him back from the brink. Each time. "I will get out," he growled through gritted teeth. Every punch was agony, every movement felt like tearing his body apart, but his rage was far worse. The feeling of being helpless, of being caged like an animal, consumed him. Punch. He would break free. Punch. No matter how many bones he shattered, no matter how much blood he lost, he would get out alive. Punch. 5 years had passed, and the mountains on the outskirts of the city remained as serene and tranquil as ever, completely unaware of the darkness they concealed beneath the surface. Meanwhile, in the city, a television broadcast was in full swing, featuring an exclusive interview with 3 of the most revered S-rank hunters. The interviewer, all smiles, couldn't help but gush over the trio's reputation for kindness and community service. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with 3 of the most beloved heroes of our time, known not only for their strength, but also for their incredible volunteer work and charity efforts. How do you all manage to stay so humble despite your success? Zapster, Boulder, and Dynamo, all polished and media-ready, nodded along with the interviewer's praise, their smiles practically gleaming under the studio lights. "Oh, we just love helping out the needy," Zapster replied, laying it on thick, flashing a grin so wide it was practically a plea for sainthood. "Yeah," Boulder chimed in, feigning modesty. "There's nothing more fulfilling than giving back. It's what keeps us grounded, you know?" The camera panned over to Dynamo, the leader of the pack, who gave a noble nod. "We do it for the people. Every day we're just trying to be better versions of ourselves." The interviewer beamed. "Such heroes. Now, if I may ask a slightly difficult question." The smile wavered just slightly as she brought up a file on her tablet. "There's been some speculation about an incident 5 years ago." Zapster and Boulder immediately tensed, while Dynamo's face remained neutral, though his eyes darkened ever so slightly. When a civilian was seriously injured during a supposed ability outrage. It's been said this civilian was the mother of a fellow classmate. Care to elaborate? Dynamo, always the performer, suddenly held his head in his hands, a perfect image of remorse. Tears began to trickle down his cheeks, dramatically catching the light of the camera. "It's true," Dynamo choked out. "Back when we were still students, I didn't have control over my abilities. And in my reckless youth, He paused as though the weight of his confession was too much to bear. I hurt my best friend's mom. It's haunted me ever since." Zapster sniffled on cue while Boulder put a hand on Dynamo's shoulder in a show of solidarity. "I've tried to reach out to him to apologize, but he disappeared that day. I never got to say how sorry I am." Dynamo's voice cracked, his tears falling more freely now, as if the universe itself had blessed him with the power of performative guilt. Just as Dynamo was about to continue with his apology, the door to the studio suddenly exploded inward with a deafening blast, shooting across the room like a rocket aimed directly at the three hunters. Instinctively, Dynamo's diamond-clad arm shot up, deflecting the door with ease, the metal crumpling like a piece of paper against him. The studio descended into chaos. The audience, who had moments ago been moved by Dynamo's tearful confession, were now screaming, scrambling to get as far from the destruction as possible. Camera operators abandoned their posts, and the interviewer looked ready to faint. But Dynamo, Zapster, and Boulder stayed glued to their spots, eyes locked on the dark figure now standing at the shattered entrance. A shadow loomed large, monstrous, and terrifying. With each step it took, the floor beneath it are cracked, deep fissures spiderwebbing outward as the weight of its presence broke the very ground. The lights flickered, and the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps echoed through the studio. Dynamo squinted through the smoke and debris, trying to get a better look at the figure. "What the hell?" he muttered, his voice laced with annoyance more than fear. Before Dynamo could react, the shadowy figure vanished. In the blink of an eye, a devastating fist, coated in unimaginable power, slammed directly into Dynamo's face. Flashback to the depths of hell. Well, more like Kang's diamond coffin, but it may as well have been hell. Encased in that impossibly tough prison, Kang had spent years in darkness, lost in the constant cycle of pain and regeneration. Punching, kicking, headbutting, clawing. If it was attached to his body, Kang used it in a desperate, insane attempt to break free. Was it months, years, decades? He couldn't tell. Inside that tomb, time lost all meaning. There wasn't even a scratch on the diamond. Not a single goddamn scratch. But something else had changed. Kang's regenerative ability, his cruel curse, was different. With each injury, each shattered bone and ripped muscle, his body wasn't just healing, it was adapting. The regeneration triggered an evolution, a grotesque transformation that made him stronger with each brutal punch. It was slow, agonizingly slow, but it was happening. He stared at his knuckles, his once human hands now barely recognizable. Bones jutted out like claws, an exoskeleton starting to form around his joints. His knuckles cracked open to reveal sinew, tendon, and something far more monstrous. This was what he had become, a creature of survival and vengeance, molded by endless torment. His whole body was breaking and rebuilding itself over and over until it was something unrecognizable, something beyond human. In the 5 years of entombment, Kang didn't just suffer, he mutated. Blood splattered, flesh ripped, bones snapped with each strike. The pain wasn't just his life, it was his purpose. It was the only thing that tethered him to the outside world. And the agony of regeneration was worse than the initial injury. But still, Kang didn't stop. He couldn't. Each day, if you could call them days, was an unholy cycle of death and rebirth. The only thing that kept him going was his hatred for the bullies who put him here. Then, one day, after a punch he had thrown 1,000,000 times before, he noticed it. A crack. A single crack. The break in his diamond prison was small, nearly invisible, but it was there. It was all he needed. Back in the present, the world caught up to Kang in a flash of violence. With a skull-like exoskeletal fist, Kang's punch connected with Dynamo's face, sending the once smug S-rank hunter flying backward. Zapster and Boulder, the two sidekicks, stood frozen, their brains short-circuiting as they tried to comprehend what the hell had just happened. They had heard of monsters, had fought many of them. But this wasn't a monster, this was something far worse. Standing before them, a figure that looked less like a man and more like a demon, a twisted being of bone, muscle, and exoskeleton, was Kang. Half of his face was masked by a skeletal plate, his body armored in jagged bone-like spikes that protruded from his skin. He looked like death incarnate, a nightmare made flesh, dripping with blood and radiating pure rage. For a moment, silence fell over the ruined studio, the only sound being the quiet crackle of broken glass beneath Kang's feet. Then Kang spoke. His voice was guttural, like it had been scraped raw from years of screaming in the dark. "Remember what you said," Kang rasped, his eyes locking onto Dynamo, who was still struggling to get back on his feet. 5 years ago, you told me I could try killing you if I managed to escape." He cracked his knuckles, the sound like bones snapping. "Well, here I am." Zapster's eyes widened in terror, and Boulder, despite his size, took a step back. They couldn't fathom what they were seeing. Kang spoke. His voice was guttural, like it had been scraped raw from years of screaming in the dark. "I'm back. Did you miss me?" Zapster, ever the showman, summoned a bolt of lightning with a flourish, aiming for Kang like he was swatting a bug. The resulting explosion sent shockwaves through the air, kicking up dust and debris as crackling electricity surged around Kang. For a moment, it looked like the fight was over. But then, through the smoke and sizzling sparks, Kang emerged, grinning like he'd just found this whole thing amusing. Lightning still dancing across his skin, he charged forward with reckless determination, his fists ready for revenge. And this time there was no stopping him. With bone blades now jutting from his forearms like nature's most sarcastic upgrade, Kang lunged at Zapster. In one brutal motion, he speared Zapster with enough force to send his head spinning. Literally. The sight of Zapster's head flying off like a kicked football left Dynamo and Boulder frozen in place, eyes wide and jaws slack as their friend's blood splattered over them. For a few excruciating seconds, the silence was unbearable. Then Zapster's body collapsed with a thud, and Boulder finally snapped back to reality. With panic fueling his every move, Boulder summoned his power, causing rocks, dirt, and sand to converge around Kang, wrapping him in a crushing ball of earth. The relief in Boulder's eyes was almost visible as he thought he'd done it, finally trapping Kang. But Boulder clearly hadn't been paying attention to Kang's track record with prisons. Inside his rocky tomb, Kang gritted his teeth once again. The ball of earth barely held him for more than a heartbeat before it exploded into 1,000 tiny fragments. The next instant, Kang's hand was wrapped around Boulder's jaw, lifting him off the ground with a disturbingly casual grip. Boulder, for his part, was still chewing gum, like that was the only thing his brain could handle at the moment. He blinked, seemingly caught off guard by the situation, right until Kang, with the ease of tearing off a sticker, ripped his jaw clean off. Boulder fell to the ground, clutching his now very jawless face, his mind probably wondering how things had gone so horribly wrong. Kang, looking almost bored at this point, raised his blade-like arm to put Boulder out of his misery. The blade came down swiftly, mercifully ending Boulder's suffering. But no rest for the wicked. Before Kang could even catch his breath, Dynamo, fists glowing with diamond-hard energy, appeared behind him, ready to deliver a sneak attack. Dynamo knew this fight was going to be ugly the second Kang rose from the rubble, but this was officially beyond his pay grade. Fists glowing with enough diamond energy to shatter a tank, Dynamo charged at Kang, only to have the guy turn around like he'd forgotten something. Except the something was a diamond-laden fist crashing into his face. Good night, sweet prince. Or so Dynamo thought. But no, Kang's face, looking like it had been to hell and back, was apparently made of the same indestructible material as bad decisions. Cracks spread across Dynamo's fists like spiderwebs, and with a barely contained wince, he realized that this was about to get a lot worse. "All right, plan B," Dynamo muttered through gritted teeth as he raised his hand. Diamond spears appeared, hovering in the air with the kind of malicious intent that only comes when someone's had enough. But unlike their childhood scraps, where these little spikes used to just poke at Kang like some glittery mosquito swarm, this time they encased the entire building. Yeah, Dynamo wasn't messing around anymore. He dropped his finger, and the spears descended in a spectacular, sparkly rain of doom. The crash of diamond against flesh should have been the end. Dynamo even allowed himself a brief moment to revel in his apparent victory, as Kang resembled a human pincushion. Except, of course, Kang had no concept of staying down. The spikes trembled. Dynamo's stomach dropped. Blood poured from every wound, dripping like some grisly fountain, and Kang, who now resembled a skeletal demon straight out of a low-budget horror movie, started to move. He wasn't just menacing now. He was a walking nightmare, covered in blood, bone blades, and the unshakable need to ruin Dynamo's entire existence. "Great, just great," Dynamo muttered as he encased himself in diamond armor. His hands transformed into sledgehammers, and with all the determination of someone who knows this might be his last bad idea, he laid into Kang. Every punch cracked bone and diamond alike, blood splattering everywhere like some twisted, abstract painting. Dynamo unleashed a brutal combo, ending it with a final, devastating blow to Kang's skull. And just like when they were teenagers, Kang caught Dynamo's fist with his mouth. Dynamo's stomach clenched as he watched Kang bite down, expecting those teeth to shatter into dust. But no. This time it was Dynamo's arm that gave way, cracking like a cheap vase. "Oh, come on!" Dynamo's mind screamed, the horror sinking in as Kang bit down harder. And then, to really add insult to injury, Kang's bony blade pierced through Dynamo's chest, because why settle for just biting an arm off when you can do both? Pinned in place by Kang's jaws, Dynamo could only scream, his mind racing for an escape plan that didn't involve losing half his limbs. Dynamo was officially out of ideas. In a last-ditch effort to free himself from Kang's bite, he slammed his hand to the floor. A massive diamond spike, his pride and joy, sprang from the ground, impaling Kang and dragging him into the air like some kind of demented shish kebab. It would have been a glorious victory moment. Clutching the now empty space where his limb used to be, Dynamo stumbled away from the scene like a guy who just realized the sale on diamond sledgehammers ended an hour ago. He hadn't gotten far when, of course, a diamond spike, his own diamond spike, mind you, speared through him. Dynamo gasped, looking down in disbelief. "You've got to be kidding me," he groaned. He'd just been out-diamonded. Kang, the walking horror show, had apparently thrown one of Dynamo's own creations back at him. Because sure, why not? Kang approached with the kind of slow, menacing walk that villains save for the big climactic moments, completely ignoring the fact that he was stabbing himself with countless diamond spikes along the way. Apparently, being impaled was just a mild inconvenience in Kang's world. Meanwhile, Dynamo was now the one looking like a human pincushion, barely holding on. With a shaky breath, Dynamo weakly asked the burning question. "Who the hell are you?" Kang's response. "Oh, just casually peeling off the skull mask that had been covering half his face like it was an old sticker he'd grown tired of." As soon as Dynamo saw the face underneath, it all clicked in the worst way possible. His heart sank. It was Worm, the weakling they'd bullied relentlessly when they were teens. Now half his face was scarred and terrifying, but there was no mistaking it. "Worm?" Dynamo's voice was barely a whisper, disbelief lacing every word. Kang didn't bother with a comeback. He just lifted his fist and clocked Dynamo, knocking whatever was left of the fight out of him. Then, with the cold efficiency of someone filling out paperwork, Kang grabbed Dynamo by the throat and rammed his skeletal sword right through his mouth and out the back of his head. Dynamo's eyes, once filled with fire and defiance, slowly dimmed as his life drained away. Kang stood there, watching the light fade from his former bully's eyes, and just like that, the rage that had fueled him for years finally began to seep out. Kang took a deep breath, feeling the exhaustion hit him like a freight train. He stood up, surveying the aftermath. The auditorium was a wreck, more crater than building at this point, and the three bodies of his former tormentors lay scattered in pools of blood. He was the only one left standing. Above him, the gray sky peeked through the ruins, and with a cruel sense of timing, the heavens opened up. A torrential rain began to pour, washing away the blood, the destruction, and whatever sense of purpose Kang had left. He dropped to his knees, staring up into the rain, feeling the cold water run over his face and the hollow emptiness settle in. 5 years of pain, anger, and vengeance had led him to this moment, and now, standing in the ruins of his victory, Kang let out a blood-curdling scream. The sound echoed through the ruins, raw and primal, until it dissolved into sobs. Because now that it was all over, he didn't know what came next. For the first time in years, Kang felt lost. Kang sat in the hospital, wrapped in a blanket like some brooding knockoff Batman, staring at the prone figure lying on the bed. His brain was struggling to process what he was seeing. His mom. She was alive. After everything, after all the chaos and destruction he'd caused, she was still here breathing. Somewhere under a crystal-clear sky, in the middle of a dense forest, a green glowing portal shimmered into existence. Inside it, a dark cave stretched endlessly, the kind of place where terrible things happen. And right now, a group of hunters, fresh off a monster hunt, were wrapping things up. They congratulated the only girl in their group, clapping her on the back, telling her how impressive it was that she'd contributed so much on her first deep dive into the gate. Blushing, she thanked them, still riding the high of her accomplishment, but her relief quickly curdled into dread as she noticed something off. The 4 men were encircling her, and the looks in their eyes weren't friendly. They smirked, cruel smiles cutting through the camaraderie. One of them, the biggest of the bunch, leaned in with a sneer. We're really grateful for you joining us, but, no one knows what happens in the gate." Her heart dropped. This wasn't happening. She shook in terror, but before she could move, the muscular guy grabbed her, pinning her arms behind her back with one hand, while the other caressed her face. "We've got a whole month in here," he whispered, voice dripping with malice. "I'm looking forward to getting to know you better." He was about to lick her face, as if things couldn't get any creepier, when suddenly, without warning, his head flew clean off. It landed on the ground with a dull thud like a forgotten football, his expression frozen in shock. The remaining 3 hunters stared, horror dawning on their faces as they whipped around looking for the source of the attack. And then they saw it. A hulking, exoskeleton-clad figure loomed in the darkness. Their instincts kicked in. They were hunters, after all. The fire mage immediately launched a volley of fireballs, while the dark mage conjured a spear of pure shadow, and the samurai brandished his katana like it was the answer to all their problems. Kang, now more monster than man, barely flinched as the fireballs hit him, bouncing off his armored hide like someone throwing pebbles at a tank. The dark spear, it shattered on impact, and the samurai, well, let's just say his katana had seen better days. The poor guy stabbed it right into Kang's chest, only for the blade to snap in half. "Oops," Kang said, if monsters could sound sarcastic, before counterattacking in one swift motion. The samurai was down before he even realized what had happened. The remaining 2 hunters were paralyzed with fear. This wasn't supposed to happen. Strong monsters, sure. But this was beyond their pay grade. And just like that, Kang lazily swiped his blade through the air, and 2 more heads rolled to the ground. Easy as pie. That left just the girl, now trembling and sobbing, her terror palpable. But Kang didn't move to attack. He simply stared at her, exoskeleton glinting menacingly under the dim light. She shakily wiped away her tears, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Thank you for saving me." But just as she uttered those words, her head separated from her body in one clean slice. Kang had swung his sword one last time. Why? To answer that question, we need to go back a few days. A few days ago, Kang was still on his knees in the destroyed auditorium, tears mixing with the rain that poured through the shattered roof. He had just murdered everyone. Dynamo and his so-called friends brutalized beyond recognition. The rage that had fueled him for years had burned out, and now he was just empty. That is, until someone broke the silence. "Well, that was quite the show," a calm female voice called out from afar, echoing through the wrecked room. Kang's head snapped up, and he spotted a blonde-haired woman casually leaning against the doorway as she had just walked in on a play, not a massacre. "How do you feel now that you've gotten your revenge?" she asked, her tone almost conversational, like they were discussing a movie ending. Kang squinted at her, anger bubbling up again. "Who the hell are you?" he growled, the rage in his voice cracking like a whip. With a smile that was far too relaxed for someone facing an unhinged monster, she introduced herself. "I'm the president of South Korea's Hunter Association." Kang blinked, caught off guard. "And how exactly do you know about me?" he spat. His tone was pure venom, but her answer, well, that was pure ice. "Oh, I've been watching you ever since that incident. 5 years ago," she said, her smile never faltering. 5 years ago? Kang's mind immediately jumped to the incident that had set him on this dark path, his mother's collapse. His heart began to race, and just like that, the rage exploded from within him. The entire auditorium trembled as Kang, in a blind fury, charged toward her, ready to skewer her like everyone else. But just as his fist was about to land, she spoke calmly, unflinchingly. "I can save your mother." The words hit him harder than any punch. His fist froze mid-air just inches from her face. The shockwave of his halted attack sent debris and rubble flying through the hallway, but she didn't even blink. "What did you just say?" Kang demanded, his voice cracking with a mix of disbelief and desperation. "I can wake her up," she clarified, like this wasn't the single most important thing he'd heard in 5 years. "After all, I'm the only S-rank healer in the world." Kang's eyes narrowed. He wasn't stupid. He'd been betrayed too many times to fall for just another empty promise. "How do I know you can be trusted?" The woman laughed, but it wasn't exactly warm. It was the kind of laugh people give when they know they've already won. "Because I'm the one who's been keeping her alive this whole time while you were stuck underground, playing the world's angriest mole." That was a punch to the gut. Kang clenched his fists, thinking it over. The rage was still there, bubbling under the surface, but now it was mixed with something else. Hope. Dangerous hope. "What do you want from me?" he finally asked, his voice low and rough. Her smile returned, but this time it was sharper, more calculating. "The world's in a bit of a mess right now. Hunters, people like you, are popping up everywhere, way too strong for regular military forces to handle. In fact, some hunters are stronger than nuclear weapons." She let that sink in for a moment before continuing. "Countries are using the gates for more than just monster hunting now. They've become battlegrounds. Nations are sending their hunters through the gates to wage wars in secret. And South Korea, we're not doing so hot. We don't have enough hunters to keep the Japanese from pushing into our territory." Kang's eyes narrowed. "And what does that have to do with me?" Her smile widened. "We can't respond with hunters. That would lead to an all-out war between our countries. But a monster attacking hunters? Well, that's a different story. You see, Kang, you're the perfect wild card, a rogue monster. No one expects you, no one blames us, and we get to even the odds." Kang stared at her, his mind racing. She was asking him to be a weapon, her weapon. To keep fighting, but not for himself, for them. In exchange, she would save his mother. Inside the gate, the pile of freshly deceased hunters that Kang had just dispatched lay as the first of his Japanese victims, setting a grim precedent for what was to come. Meanwhile, outside the mystical chaos of the gate, Japan was having itself a perfectly lovely summer day. Well, lovely for everyone except the country's highest-ranking officials. In the sleek, glass-encased Prime Minister's official residence, something was most definitely brewing. And it wasn't tea. Seated at his oversized desk, the Prime Minister of Japan, Juto Ryuzaki, had his hands clasped in front of him like a headmaster about to expel a student. His wrinkled, bald head gleamed under the overhead lights, veins bulging with the kind of irritation only bureaucratic incompetence can ignite. Calmly, though with an underlying menace that could strip paint off a wall, Ryuzaki asked the Minister of Defense a deceptively simple question. "Are there strong monsters in the gates?" The Minister of Defense, desperately trying to read the situation like a man defusing a bomb, replied, "No, Prime Minister. The monsters have mostly been cleared." Ryuzaki nodded slowly, like he was hearing this for the first time. "I see, and tell me," he continued, his voice tightening just slightly, "are there strong hunters in South Korea?" The Minister of Defense, now wishing he had called in sick today, gulped. "No, sir, they're not a threat." What happened next was about as subtle as a piano falling from a building. Prime Minister Ryuzaki slammed his fist onto the desk with enough force to rattle the windows, sending papers and pens flying like startled pigeons. "Then why?" he bellowed, his voice crackling with age and rage. "Haven't our hunters taken the Korean peninsula yet?" The veins on his bald head throbbed, and he leaned forward, fixing the Minister of Defense with a glare that could melt glass. The silence that followed was the kind of thick, suffocating quiet usually reserved for funerals or awkward family dinners. The poor minister, sweating bullets and regretting every life choice that had led him to this moment, stammered out an apology. I'm sorry, sir. I'll rectify the situation immediately." Ryozaki, still glaring with the intensity of a malfunctioning laser pointer, growled, "And how exactly do you plan to rectify it?" At this, the minister's expression changed. He smiled, a confident, almost smug grin spreading across his face. "I'll take care of it myself," he declared, standing a bit taller, his voice suddenly oozing with arrogance. This was no ordinary bureaucrat. This was Kakeru Itosai, Japan's #1 hunter, and oh, by the way, also the Minister of Defense. He didn't need an army. He was the army. With his simple cape, golden bracers, and a singular, dangly earring that screamed, "Yes, I am better than you." Itosai didn't quite look like the typical bureaucrat, or a hunter for that matter. But then again, appearances were for peasants. A singular lock of white hair shaped like a crescent moon hung above the rest of his sleek, dark mane, the perfect cherry on top of his overly dramatic persona. After his dramatic declaration, Itosai left the meeting with all the confidence of a man who had never once doubted he was the main character in everyone's story. On his way out, he ordered his secretary to prepare his sword. The secretary, who had clearly read way too many headlines about the hunters who had gone into the gates and never come back, hesitated. "Sir, with all due respect, all the hunters we've sent inside were lightweights. It might be wise to take a team with you." Itosai stopped dead in his tracks, turning just his head toward her, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "Do I," he asked, voice low and dangerous, "look like someone who needs a team?" The secretary, now sensing that her life expectancy might drastically decrease if she continued this line of thought, bowed nervously. "No, sir, my apologies." With that, she scurried off to fetch his sword, mentally preparing herself for whatever destruction this man was about to unleash. A few hours later, Kakeru Itosai found himself strolling through the ominous cave where his elite hunters, Ifo, had mysteriously disappeared. It was a beautiful day back in Japan's countryside, perfect for a leisurely massacre, he thought. But here, deep inside the gate, it was all gloom, blood, and guts. Perfect. As he casually sliced his way through the weak, pitiful monsters that dared cross his path, he couldn't help but roll his eyes. These were the things that supposedly killed his subordinates. Honestly, they must have died of boredom before anything else. Even his sword, which hadn't broken a sweat yet, seemed disappointed. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity of dealing with these useless nuisances, he reached the cave's end. And there it was, the answer to why his underlings had vanished. A grotesque pile of corpses, and sitting atop that lovely heap of hunter remains like some morbid throne was Kang, the skeletal humanoid monster who looked more like he belonged in a Halloween display than on a battlefield. Kakeru's first reaction? Fury, of course. This was the thing that slaughtered his team. His elite hunters reduced to a mountain of failure. Oh, no, 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 no. That simply wouldn't do. Without even thinking, Kakeru drew his sword in one fluid, dramatic motion, his trademark flair, and lunged at Kang like he was about to cut down a particularly annoying tree branch. Except, to his utter shock, the monster actually blocked his sword. Yes, Kang, the glorified skeleton with a sword for an arm, had the audacity to stop his attack with its own bony blade. It didn't seem right, didn't feel right. Kakeru, still in mid-slash, felt personally offended. How dare this skeletal freak interrupt my epic moment? Insulted, Kakeru effortlessly dodged Kang's counterattack, moving like a dancer who had rehearsed these steps 1,000 times. Then, with a quick jab to Kang's chest, He forced the monster back, creating some space between them. The gap was only momentary, though, because Kakaru was already preparing his next move. Moon breathing. 16th form. Lunar rain? Nah, just kidding. We are not in Demon Slayer. He unleashed Kagelyu, a sharp, precise slash aimed straight at Kang. The skeletal monster managed to block it, but the force sent him flying back, coughing up blood in the process. Kakaru raised an eyebrow. "Oh, so you bleed? How cute." But Kakaru wasn't done playing yet. With the grace of a seasoned swordsman who'd read way too many manga, he immediately followed up with his second technique, Second Moon. A burst of pure energy shot from his sword, crashing into Kang like a truck, sending him smashing into the cave wall. The monster was still in one piece. Impressive. Kakeru even offered him a rare compliment. "You're sturdier than you look, I'll give you that." But compliments were fleeting, and so was Kakaru's patience. He launched into his third technique, Third Moon, swinging his sword toward Kang, who was now plastered against the cave wall. This time, however, the monster dodged with surprising agility, counterattacking with its skeletal blade aimed straight at Kakaru's neck, like it had finally decided enough was enough. Oh, but Kakaru was far from impressed. He barely blinked as he effortlessly reversed his blade and, with a nonchalant swipe, chopped off Kang's arm. "You might be tough," he mused, "but my katana slices through diamonds. What's bone compared to that?" And with that, in a single clean stroke, Kakeru decapitated the skeletal monster. Kang's head rolled onto the cave floor, followed by the rest of his crumpled body, lifeless at last. Sheathing his sword with a flourish, Kakeru stood over the remains, feeling a mix of triumph and mild irritation. "How," he muttered under his breath, "did my elite hunters lose to something like this?" He shook his head, already bored with the victory, and turned to leave, completely unfazed by the carnage left in his wake. Kang's eyes were vacant, as if he had already checked out of life. But in his mind, oh, he was having a grand old time with memories of his childhood. Because why not stroll down Trauma Lane when your hands are stained with fresh blood? His dad, now there was a guy, always busy with work, but he had that warmth, you know? The kind of man who could show up with a box of fried chicken and make the world feel okay again. And like any overly excited kid, Kang darted across the street to greet his dad without even noticing the truck coming at them like a death wish on wheels. Of course, Dad saw it. The last thing Kang remembered before everything went poof was his dad dropping that glorious box of fried chicken and sprinting toward him. The real hero, right? Pushed Kang out of the way like some action movie scene, only there were no happy endings here. The truck's headlights painted Dad like an angel before reality hit. Literally. Kang's dad died that night, and so did any semblance of a normal life. With Dad gone, his business crumbled, and suddenly Kang and his mom were swimming in debt. Well, more like drowning. His mom, who used to have these soft, gentle hands, ended up scrubbing dishes like it was a competitive sport. Every time he asked if she was okay, she'd flash him that brave, everything's fine, honey smile, but Kang knew better. Every night the truth screamed through the silence, his mom crying softly beside him, and every tear was his fault. Guilt? Oh, it was practically his best friend by then. A few days later, Kang had a bright idea. Maybe I shouldn't live anymore. Yep, solid logic. So there he was, trembling, holding a box cutter, ready to put an end to it. But just as he was about to go through with it, his mom walked in with dinner and, of course, because life loves irony, she dropped the tray when she saw what he was doing. There he was, tears streaming down his face, but with a smile because, in the weirdest, most tragic twist, his wounds were healing on their own. "Mom, look, I might be an Awakens," he had said, beaming like he had just won the lottery. The TV in the background blared about Korea's #1 hunter, and Kang, in all his naive, hopeful glory, hugged his mom tight. "I'm going to be a hunter. We're going to be rich and happy again." Oh, sweet summer child. Fast forward, and here he was, no riches, no happiness, and certainly no awake mother. Nope, she was in a coma, lying in a hospital bed, while Kang played the part of the world's angriest, most guilt-ridden wreck. This memory, the one where he thought he could actually fix things, was the one that snapped him back to reality. His eyes flickered with life again, and just like that, his mind brought up a conversation he'd had not too long ago with her, the president of South Korea's Hunter Association. She had filled him in on the state of the world, how everything was spiraling out of control, how the balance had long since shattered. Nations weren't just at odds anymore, they were being conquered by hunters, literal superhumans. And their biggest threat? Japan, of course. That's when she dropped the bomb. They didn't need a hero. Oh no, they had plenty of those. What they needed was a monster. And Kang? He fit the bill perfectly. Kakeru Itosai stood there trying to think of his next move. And for a man who was used to solving most problems by slicing them in half, he was in unfamiliar territory. His mind wandered, probably reflecting on how much time he'd wasted on this skeletal nuisance, Kang. Wasn't this supposed to be a quick job? Yet here he was, still dealing with the bonehead. "I guess I'll have to go to South Korea myself to clean up this mess," Kakeru mused, his ego swelling at the idea of personally conquering an entire country. Of course, while he was daydreaming about his glorious future, he completely missed the fact that Kang's decapitated head, yes, the one he had so confidently lopped off, was slowly inching its way toward him like the world's creepiest Roomba. It wasn't until Kang's head bit down on his leg with the determination of a dog attacking a chew toy that Kakeru even realized what was happening. "What the?" he screeched, his eyes bulging in disbelief as he looked down at the head now gnawing through his shin. There, growing out of the head like some twisted science experiment gone wrong, was a whole new skeleton. "Oh, fantastic! Regeneration," Kakeru muttered sarcastically through gritted teeth, because clearly decapitating you wasn't enough. Meanwhile, Kang continued chomping away like he was enjoying a snack, and Kakeru let out a yelp that could only be described as a mix between rage and absolute disbelief. In one quick motion, he sliced Kang's face to get him off, hobbling back, blood trickling down his injured leg. For the first time, Kakeru realized something unpleasant. This wasn't going to be the easy win he'd expected. Suddenly, a crescent moon symbol flared to life on Kakeru's forehead, his eyes lighting up like the world's most aggressive lightning storm. Moonlight reflected off his sword, illuminating the cave in a surreal glow, and in that instant, Kakeru vanished from sight. Kang could barely register his movements as he flickered around the cave like a ghost, the only hint of his presence being the flashes of light and the unsettling hum of his technique powering up. And then, with a dramatic roar that echoed through the cavern, Kakeru unleashed his deadliest attack, Fatal 12th Moon. His silhouettes multiplied in a whirlwind of slashes, and Kang didn't even have time to blink before his whole body was shredded by Kakeru's katana. The force of the attack was so overwhelming that the shock waves ripped through the cave, traveling out through the gate and back into the real world. Entire sections of the forest and mountainside outside the gate were obliterated, leaving behind a wasteland of devastation. Back in the cave, the roof had been carved into intricate moonlit patterns, while the floor resembled a jigsaw puzzle that had just lost all its pieces. Kakeru, panting and limping from his still throbbing ankle wound, surveyed his work with satisfaction. "That should do it," he muttered to himself, shakily walking away, already thinking about how much he would enjoy bragging about this later. But just as he thought he could finally breathe easy, a sharp spike of bone shot into his other leg. He froze, a nervous laugh escaping him as the reality of the situation dawned on him. Slowly, he turned to see a skeletal hand, shaking but still pointing directly at him. Attached to that hand, the battered but still horrifying skeleton of Kang, crawling toward him like a nightmare that just refused to end. "You've got to be kidding me," Kakeru muttered, wide-eyed. He couldn't believe it. Kang, despite having been diced and pulverized like an overripe vegetable, was still regenerating, still fighting. Kakeru's hands trembled, not from fear. No, he wouldn't admit to that, but from sheer exhaustion and disbelief. "How is this even possible?" he muttered through gritted teeth, gripping his sword tightly. His confidence, though still intact, was now tinged with a deep-seated irritation. This was not how legendary victories were supposed to go. With a defiant roar, Kakeru Itosai charged back toward Kang, limping, bloodied, but refusing to let this skeleton make a fool out of him any longer. A few days had passed since Japan's top hunter, Kakeru Itosai, bravely, or perhaps stupidly, marched into the mysterious gate that appeared in the countryside. Now, an army of the elite hunters from the Ministry of Defense surrounded the gate, all looking tense. At the front of the group stood Prime Minister Juto, arms crossed, pretending like this was just another day at the office, as if his star hunter hadn't been missing for 3 days. Kakeru's secretary, clearly not sharing Juto's confidence, glanced at the Prime Minister with barely concealed anxiety. "Do we really need this much firepower?" she asked, as if the answer wasn't obvious from the amount of sweating going on among the hunters. Juto, ever the serious leader, gave her a calm nod. "It's been 3 days. Kakeru hasn't come back. We need to check on him." He paused as though that would somehow make things less ominous. After all, he's still Japan's #1 hunter. Of course, before Juto could dive into a full speech about Japan's strength and how much they relied on Kakeru, his grand proclamation was interrupted by the sound of something rolling out of the gate. A head, specifically Kakeru Itosai's head. The hunters froze and Juto blinked, mouth hanging open mid-sentence. You could practically hear the record scratch. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, a skeletal figure casually strolled out of the gate and onto Japanese soil. Kang, the skeletal monster Kakeru had gone into defeat, was now sightseeing in the countryside. Juto, still processing the sight of his #1 hunter's detached head, didn't even have time to scream before his own head took a sudden flight, detached from his body courtesy of Kang. So much for Japan's leadership holding it together. Meanwhile, back in South Korea, the atmosphere at the Korean Hunter Association headquarters was lighter. The infamous blonde-haired president stands there comfortably at her office, while her subordinate, looking as if he'd just been slapped by a ghost, stared at a report with wide eyes. Ma'am, Kang, he killed Japan's defense minister and, attacked their prime minister." The president, entirely unbothered by this news with a smirk. "Well, well," she mused, tapping her fingers together. "I guess they won't be as confident as before, huh?" Not even remotely curious who would win, the ever-regenerating skeleton or Japan's strongest hunter? The subordinate asked, as though they weren't watching a monster parade in real time. Before anyone could answer that sarcastic gem, Prime Minister Juto's severed head decided it wasn't done with today. In an utterly bizarre display of power, his head just reattached itself to his body like it had never taken a tumble off his neck, because apparently physics takes a back seat when you're an SS rank hunter. With lava practically oozing from his fists, Juto's flaming bald head turned toward Kang, and, without even a word, he delivered a punch so devastating it could have been mistaken for a comet slamming into Earth. The ground shook, explosions rang out, and Kang was sent crashing into the dirt like yesterday's news. Juto stood tall over Kang, lava dripping from his fists like some unholy superhero, while the remnants of his clothes smoldered around him. Because, yes, this wasn't just the Prime Minister of Japan. Oh no! Juto was also Japan's top hunter, an SSS-class monster in his own right. Apparently, being a world leader just wasn't spicy enough, so he decided to add walking volcano to his resume. His entire body glowed with molten heat, and the cut that Kang had made across his neck earlier already healed, because what's a little decapitation when you're made of magma? Kang, meanwhile, lay sprawled on the ground, looking more like an extra in a disaster movie than the terrifying skeletal monster everyone had been so concerned about. One punch from Juto had put him down, unconscious no less, but before we can get back to watching Juto stomp around like some literal hothead. Quick update on the story after a year-long break. The author has rebooted the series with some key plot changes. Instead of being trapped in a diamond prison, Kang was now pushed into a powerful red gate by Bullies, where he gained his bone ability. Also, the president of Japan is looking younger, and the guild president who met Kang at the auditorium now has black hair and a more Korean appearance. These changes definitely shift the tone, and I'm excited to see where the story goes from here. Let me know what you think of these updates. The story kicks us back 3 years. Simpler times. Back then, most of the monsters from the gates had already been subjugated. Humanity had gotten pretty good at that whole not dying from supernatural creatures thing. Problem was, once the monsters were handled, people started to realize the hunters themselves were the new problem. Turns out, when you've got superpowered individuals walking around, people tend to get a little nervous. A few nations try to, let's say, remove the hunter problem, but that went about as well as you'd expect when your opponents can regenerate or summon fireballs. Oops. Most countries wised up quickly and decided to strike deals with their hunters instead of fighting them, coexisting with these walking weapons. Some hunters, though, skipped the polite route and just flat-out conquered their home nations. Japan. Oh, Japan wasn't so lucky. They got Prime Minister Juto. Aggressive before he awakened, Juto was like a one-man conquest train after the hunter system emerged. And with his newfound powers, taking control of Japan was just his warm-up. His eyes had always been on the big prize, South Korea. Because why just lead one country when you can have two? But surprise, surprise, Kang was not done. Nope, not even close. In a move that would have the laws of biology weeping in a corner, Kang regenerates right before everyone's eyes, standing tall as if Juto's flaming fist had been nothing more than a love tap. The hunters accompanying Juto, brimming with misplaced confidence, wasted no time and launched themselves at Kang. One particularly over-eager hunter swung his weapon, clearly aiming for a dramatic decapitation. Plot twist. It was his own head that hit the ground, rolling away like a bowling ball. Oops. Another hunter stepped up to play hero, only to find his face meeting a rather unfortunate fate, crushed like an overripe melon. At this point, you'd think someone would call it a day, but no. Juto and his gaggle of hunters could only watch in horror as Kang stood in front of them, utterly unfazed. The skeletal figure might as well have been the Grim Reaper himself, but with a not today attitude. Juto's calm demeanor began to crack, his molten fists bubbling with frustration. With a voice that could freeze fire, he snarled at his team, "Anyone who moves, I'll kill personally." Because, clearly, the only thing worse than getting crushed by Kang was getting turned into a human torch by your own boss. His words hung in the air, thick with dread. The entire crew was frozen, not by fear of Kang, but by fear of their own leader. And as Kang marched forward, step by step, toward the Prime Minister, the air felt like it was being squeezed out of the room. Just as things looked like they were about to explode again, we're yanked out of the present and tossed back in time, to a day that was somehow even colder than Juto's temper. Snow was falling gently from the sky, and a young Juto stumbled across a boy, shivering in the streets, clearly on the verge of becoming a human popsicle. Always the curious sort, Juto asked the kid what he was doing out there. But instead of answering right away, the boy looked up, his lips trembling, and asked, "Who are you?" Now, this might be a tiny bit embarrassing for Juto, especially considering that he was literally on every TV screen in the background. But this kid, he had no clue who Juto was. None. Unfazed, Juto told the boy to come with him because, well, the whole freezing to death thing wasn't a great look. And just like that, Juto took the boy under his wing. As they walked together through the snow, Juto finally asked the boy his name. "Kakeru," the boy replied, his voice barely above a whisper. And that's when the past came crashing into the present. Because this wasn't just any kid. This was Kakeru Itosai, the very same boy Juto had once saved, and the very same hunter Kang had killed inside the gate. Seeing the head of his most cherished child, the same kid he'd raised like a son, lying there like a grotesque souvenir, Juto absolutely snaps. And when the Prime Minister of Japan snaps, he doesn't just throw a tantrum. No, he delivers a punch that sends Kang flying like a rag doll on rocket boosters. But of course, Juto isn't about to stop there. One punch? That's cute. Instead, he follows up with a flurry of blows, each one more bone-crushing than the last until, yep, Kang's head is blown clean off. There's Kang falling backward, his head and brain obliterated. For any normal person, that would have been game over, but Kang, well, we know this guy doesn't exactly follow the rules of anatomy. Still, Juto isn't taking chances. Unleashing a power that would make even the sun feel insecure, Juto sets off a wave of destruction that burns and obliterates everything in its path. The air is thick with ash as Kang is reduced to nothing more than a sad pile of bones. Mission accomplished, right? Cue the applause. The hunters nearby are practically tripping over each other to congratulate the Prime Minister for, doing exactly what everyone expects of him. Another day, another monster incinerated. Juto's face is as calm as ever, but there's a faint smugness in the air as he steps forward to collect the head of his son. But just as his fingers are about to wrap around it, something horrifying happens. Kang, reduced to bones and dust just moments ago, begins putting himself back together. Like some nightmarish version of a jigsaw puzzle, the pieces reassemble, and Juto's eyes widen in absolute shock. What's worse, this isn't the first time he's seen something like this. His mind flashes back to a past soaked in blood, a past where he had watched the same kid, Kakeru Itosai, stand over countless dead bodies of other hunters, their defeat painted across the battlefield, and who had finished them off. That sweet shivering boy Juto had found in the snow years ago. Back in that memory, Juto had apologized to Kakeru for making him do such dirty work, turning him into a weapon against his fellow hunters. But Kakeru had brushed it off, assuring Juto that he didn't mind, that he was just happy Japan was finally under their control. It was all for the greater good, after all. That's when Juto had casually brought up their next plan. South Korea and China were next on the menu. He even told Kakeru, rather nonchalantly, that he might not survive the next fight. In case the boy wanted to quit, no hard feelings. But Kakeru had been loyal to a fault, quick to remind Juto that he had saved him from the cold, from death itself. And in return, Kakeru had promised to repay that debt for the rest of his life, however long that might be. But before leaving, there was one thing Kakeru asked for, one thing that had caught Juto off guard. He wanted to call Juto father. Juto, always the pragmatic one, had called him close-minded for even feeling the need to ask. It goes without saying, Juto had replied, "You are my son. The air is so thick with tension you could cut it with a knife, or, melt it, considering Juto is turning everything into a molten nightmare. The ground beneath the hunter's feet has morphed into literal lava, thanks to the Prime Minister's very casual rage. It's like a scene from hell, Only hell is apparently Juto's default setting when things don't go his way. One of the hunters, a sharp-eyed lady with ice powers, clearly values her life and shoes more than becoming a human barbecue. She's not about to let Juto's anger fry her into oblivion, so she does what any sensible person would do. She freezes the ground. Her voice, tinged with justifiable panic, cuts through the chaos as she shouts, "Hey, Prime Minister, could you maybe not turn us all into toast?" But Juto, oh, he's completely checked out of reality. Gone. Instead of resembling anything remotely human, he's now more like a walking apocalypse made of fire, casually liquefying everything around him as if the world were just one big stick of butter. Juto, of course, is the picture of calm amidst the inferno. Because why wouldn't he be? He's cool as a cucumber. Well, the most terrifying fiery cucumber to ever grace the planet, as he takes confident steps forward. And just as he does, the mountain decides, "Screw it, I'm joining in," and erupts into a full-blown volcano. Perfect timing. Juto, now fully transformed into some unholy magma abomination, is ready to turn the whole place into ash. With one simple flick of his wrist, flames shoot out, incinerating everything in their path, including Kang. Kang's flesh sizzles and melts off like he's a marshmallow on a campfire, but instead of staying down like any normal person, our boy decides to make one last leap at Juto. A leap with, well, barely any flesh left to work with. That's the spirit, I guess. The Prime Minister, clearly unimpressed, casually summons more magma from the earth, which then proceeds to turn Kang's bones into something resembling a charred chicken wing. Meanwhile, the other hunters, those sane enough to appreciate living, are hightailing it out of there, scrambling to avoid being vaporized by the sheer heat. The whole mountain has turned into a lava-covered disaster zone, and chaos has well and truly descended. But just when it seems like Juto's temper tantrum is winding down, Kang, still very much a stubborn thorn in his side, refuses to fully disappear. Juto, ever the efficient killer, knows this isn't over, so what does he do? He calls in Haname, the ice lady, because if there's one thing that can deal with lava, it's her frosty touch. Haname appears cool as ever despite the literal inferno surrounding her. She nonchalantly removes her glove like this is just another day in the office and starts freezing the surface of the lava. The molten ground beneath her solidifies, trapping what's left of Kang underneath. As the ice spreads, Juto takes a moment to enjoy the silence. Finally, some peace. He gives one final glance at the cooling lava and mutters under his breath, "Melt. Forever, you persistent bastard." Over in South Korea, at the Kang Guild headquarters, things aren't exactly sunshine and roses either. A healer is sweating bullets, trying her absolute hardest to patch up a certain hunter. And who's the lucky guy she's pouring all her effort into? Dynamo, the same genius who decided it was a great idea to mess with Kang's mom. Let's just say it didn't end well for him, and now here he is, looking like he should have kicked the bucket a long time ago. But nope, stubbornly clinging to life, just to keep things interesting. Back on the lava-covered mountain, things are finally cooling down, both literally and figuratively. The Prime Minister, with the calm authority of someone who's just obliterated a human being with magma, orders his hunters to pack it in. Only the highest-ranked ones will stay, of course. Because if you're not top tier, there's no point in sticking around to get charbroiled. Everyone nods, happy to not become the next lava-based casualty. And then, well, Kang. Because of course you can't just leave a guy like him under a layer of molten lava and expect that to be the end of it. Cue Kang's hand violently punching through the solidified layer. He's crawling out like some undead horror movie villain, but his thoughts, they're on another level of savage. See, while everyone else is acting like messing with lava is some monumental event, Kang's sitting there thinking, really? Lava? A tickle? He's been through worse, way worse. He survived the Blood Gate, where the heat was tens of thousands of times worse than this. Still, even for someone as hardcore as Kang, this fire hurts like hell. Unbearable pain? Check. But does that stop him? Nope. Slowly but surely, Kang breaks through the thick, dried lava, leaving Hanam completely gobsmacked. The Ice Queen herself just stands there, blinking like she's seen a ghost. Or worse, an unkillable cockroach that crawled its way out of hell. Because let's be real, that's basically what Kang is at this point. The Prime Minister, though? He knows what's up. He's no longer sweating figuratively. No, the guy is literally sweating bullets now, fully aware that the situation just went from bad to, oh, we're all going to die. Calmly but definitely panicking on the inside, he orders Haname to gather the hunters and get somewhere safe. And she's not arguing. One glance back at Kang, who's still crawling out of the depths of lava like it's just another Tuesday, and she totally gets why Juto's sweating his… well, you get the idea. But Juto isn't done. No. My man decides to go full action hero mode. With zero hesitation, he leaps straight into the volcano. Because if you're going to fight a guy like Kang, you might as well make it dramatic. And what's better than a superhero landing right next to the walking disaster himself? Juto lands with such force that the shockwave literally blows Kang away like he's a pesky leaf caught in a windstorm. And there, watching from the sidelines, is Haname. The look on her face? Pure anxiety. Flashback to Japan. The air is thick with tension, not from lava this time, but from Haname's deep concern. Her eyes are fixed on the Prime Minister, who's pushing himself to his limit once again, like a man determined to shave a few decades off his lifespan. She steps up, grabbing his muscular arm, her voice soft but urgent. Why are you doing this? Magma regeneration isn't omnipotent, you know. Her voice is laced with both worry and sarcasm because, let's be real, this guy's like a walking time bomb with a god complex. Juto, being Juto, responds with the usual stoic determination of a man who's convinced he's Japan's last hope. He gives a grim smile and says, among the 4 great hunter nations, USA, China, Russia, and Japan, we're the weakest. The frustration in his voice is palpable. If we can't absorb South Korea, we might not survive. She reminds him, a lot of hunters will die for this. But Juto, ever the martyr, clenches his fists and tells her in no uncertain terms that he's ready to sacrifice his own body. If I have to fight alone, so be it. Ah, yes, nothing screams heroism like a man preparing to literally burn himself alive for the sake of his country. Back in the present, Juto channels that fiery resolve into action, literally. He punches the ground so hard that poor Kang, who thought he was tough, is sent flying back like a rag doll. Not satisfied with just one punch, Juto charges up another and lands it so hard that Kang smashes into the volcano's wall, shattering it like a cheap prop. It's a relentless barrage of punches that would make even a god wince. But Kang, he's just that guy, managing to keep his balance and fight back. Though Juto promptly throws another wave of fire at him like it's nothing. The flames hit their mark, severing Kang's hands and sending his body tumbling into the molten abyss. But Juto, fueled by pure magma and too much caffeine, isn't letting up. He leaps into the air and crashes down like a literal meteor, shaking the entire mountain with a godlike impact. In the midst of all this chaos, Haname, ever the dutiful wife, races to the other hunters and delivers the evacuation order. But surprise, surprise, the hunters aren't going anywhere. They apologize, but there's no way they're abandoning Juto. He saved them too many times, and they're ready to die protecting him, even if the whole mountain turns into a fiery death trap. Oh, and they casually refer to her as the Prime Minister's wife, which feels like a nod to the fact that, yeah, this guy looks way younger now, sparing us all from some awkward age gap vibes. Meanwhile, inside the literal heart of the volcano, the battle between Juto and Kang is only getting more insane. Juto is relentlessly pounding Kang deeper into the molten depths, reducing him to ashes more times than anyone can count. But, like clockwork, Kang starts crawling out again. You'd think getting incinerated 100 times would be enough for anyone, but apparently not for this guy. Just when you think things can't get worse, Kang, because of course it's Kang, leaps toward Haname. Juto's blood boils, and not just because he's made of magma at this point. Kang grabs Haname's freezing hand, and for a split second the guy who survived hellfire freezes. But does that stop him? Nope. He drags her down into the volcano, like the absolute nightmare he is. The other hunters, they jump in after them because why not? If you're going to go out, might as well go out in a literal volcano fight, right? Juto isn't far behind. He slashes off Kang's arm in a blaze of magma-fueled glory, pulling Hanami close to protect her. But just as he does, Kang pulls off the unthinkable. He slices off Juto's head. Yep, you read that right. The Prime Minister's head flies off his shoulders. But hold your applause, because it's still hanging on by some freaky magma connection. Kang, ever the opportunist, grabs Hanam's freezing hand and forces her to touch Juto's head. You know where this is going? Before anyone can process it, Juto's head starts freezing. And just when you think it can't get worse, but Kang, oh, he's not done. With a smug grin, he dashes forward, slashing through everything in his path like a bloodthirsty tornado. The hunters, the ones who swore to protect Juto, they drop like flies, their bodies falling in grotesque heaps. And Haname? She's standing there, frozen in place, both literally and figuratively, as she watches her comrades fall, tears streaming down her face. In the next moment, it's her turn to lose her head, quite literally. In her final moments, Haname's eyes flutter, heavy with the weight of inevitability. Time slows to a cruel crawl. A flood of memories rushes through her mind. You know, the standard sappy montage, laughter, shared meals, quiet nights together where Juto wasn't trying to obliterate someone with fire. Moments of love and joy where the world wasn't a battlefield but a home. But reality, it's a twisted bastard because just as her head falls, those memories warp and decay, turning into nightmares, symbols of everything she's about to lose. The life she built with Juto? Poof. Gone. It's like the universe has decided to play the worst prank ever. Her mind flashes through scenes of carnage, of all the bodies falling one by one, their limbs strewn across the battlefield like some grotesque jigsaw puzzle that nobody signed up for. And here she is, about to be the next broken piece. With her consciousness dimming, Haname instinctively reaches out, not to Juto, not to the other hunters, but to her own head. Because, hey, if you're going to go out, might as well try and salvage some dignity, right? And in the last, bitterly poetic moment, she freezes herself entirely. Yep, she pulls an Elsa on herself, a tragic self-imposed end to what was once a beautiful life filled with love. The only thing left of her is a frozen statue, her limbs scattered like afterthoughts, the rest of her encased in a block of ice that will melt long before the pain does. As the dust, lava, and utter carnage settle, there's only one figure still standing. Kang. Kang, unfazed as always, cracks his neck with an almost comical sigh. Well, that was dramatic, he mutters, glancing back at the crumbling battlefield. No witty one-liner, no emotional turmoil, just business as usual. After all, there's a whole other country waiting for him to wreak havoc on. With one last look at the shattered remains of Japan's greatest hunters, Kang decides it's time to head back to Korea. Because, let's be real, there's still plenty of chaos to be had over there. The scene shifts to South Korea's Kang Guild, inside the mana storage room where the one and only Dynamo, that same walking disaster we all love to roll our eyes at, is pushing himself way too hard. Typical, right? This guy just doesn't know when to quit. Standing off to the side, a lady, whose name is apparently not important enough to mention, warns him in that classic "I told you so" tone not to overdo it. Why? Because, fun fact, He's the only one who still has mana left. His friends? Oh, they're already fertilizing the daisies. AKA dead? Dynamo, or should we call him Han Taisu, Guild Master Extraordinaire? Pauses, acknowledging the brutal reality. Yeah, he remembers it all, every agonizing detail. But what really burns him up is that brat he used to bully back in the day, who somehow escaped the Bloodgate and turned the tables. Imagine getting killed by the kid you gave wedgies to during recess. Ouch. Karma really knows how to kick a guy when he's down. We also get a little upgrade in the backstory here, because why not? Apparently his powers, once all about transparent stones, now come in a new and improved Radiant Red Edition. It's like a terrible makeover, but hey, if it fuels his thirst for revenge against Kang, who's complaining? In classic I'm the villain now fashion, Taisu demands that the lady unseal whatever's been holding him back. She's panting, sweating buckets, and probably regretting every life choice that led her to this moment, but she does it. Mission accomplished, she breaks the seal. Taisu, now supercharged and dramatically overpowered, is free to unleash his wrath. A little while later, they gather in the Grand Assembly Hall. Taisu steps onto the stage like the triumphant comeback kid. The crowd, they bow their heads and the whispers of disbelief ripple through the room. They all thought this guy was worm food, but nope, here he is, fresh from the dead and looking to kill someone. Of course, now that he's alive, they're more than eager to follow his every command. Nothing says loyalty like, "Please don't kill us next." The head of Kang Guild's intelligence team, Han Kyung-chan, an S-rank hunter himself, steps forward, all business to report. Kang has moved to the gate, he says, barely containing his fear. You can almost hear the gulp before he continues, after the massacre in Japan. But before he can get another word out, Taisu, ever the impatient psycho, rolls his eyes and cuts him off, literally. In one swift, no-fuss motion, he chops off Kyung-chan's head. The man's decapitated head tumbles to the ground, and the other guild members freeze, eyes wide, jaws dropping. You know, just another day in the life of an S-rank hunter guild. Holding Kyung-chan's head like a grotesque trophy, Taisu casually tosses it aside, as if decapitating your junior was just part of the morning routine. The other members, they're left standing there, speechless, not sure whether to be terrified or impressed. And why did he do it? Because, as we learn, Taisu has been a busy little bee. He already absorbed the Korea Hunter Association 3 years ago. Yeah, this guy doesn't just play the long game, he owns it. But hey, no biggie. It's not like anyone expected him to be reasonable, right? So as the dust settles and Kyung-ki-chan's lifeless head rolls off into obscurity, Taisu's on a roll, or more accurately, a bloody rampage. He grabs another unfortunate soul, casually twisting his limbs apart as if trying to open a stubborn bottle of ketchup. Snap, crackle, pop. The poor guy's body explodes like a grotesque firework, showering the room in blood. For Taisu, it's just another Tuesday. The scene is straight out of a horror movie that decided excessive wasn't in its vocabulary. Cue the flashback because no good massacre is complete without a reminder of why this lunatic is doing what he's doing. A girl, trembling, had once asked Taisu with the kind of cautious concern you'd use around a wild animal, "Do you really need to remove the seal? You know, it's cursed." And of course, we all know his answer. The guy's motto might as well be go big or go home and burn it down on the way out. Fast forward to the present moment, and the massacre is in full swing. Taisu is killing everyone in sight like he's on a quest to single-handedly drop the population numbers. Guild members are running for their lives, but honestly, why bother? The man is a walking death sentence. It's as if they're extras in a zombie movie. Except Taisu is the Horde. He's not just murdering people, though. Oh no, that would be too simple. He's absorbing their powers into himself like some sort of power-hungry vacuum cleaner of doom, and with each kill he gets crazier, more unhinged, laughing maniacally as the overwhelming energy fuels his madness. It's a massacre, sure, but for him, it's a buffet. Meanwhile, the poor lady watching all this unfold can barely hold it together. Despair is written all over her face. She's not sure whether to scream, cry, or just faint. So she asks the burning question on everyone's mind. Why? Why does he have to do this? Taisu doesn't miss a beat. Kang, he growls, his voice filled with vengeance. That bastard Kang killed the SS-ranked Prime Minister, and even after absorbing the powers of over 1,500 hunters, Taisu still doesn't think it'll be enough. So naturally, the solution is to go to Russia and get even more power, because if you're already insane, might as well go international with it. Cut to the port where we find the president. Calm, beautiful, and way too composed for someone living in the same world where a mass murderer is leveling guilds like a hobby. She welcomes Kang as he steps out of the gate, as if things aren't completely spiraling into chaos. Next, we get a much-needed break from the carnage with a hospital scene. Kang's mother lies in bed, and we learn that the president has started a procedure to heal her. It's an S-rank healing ability, the kind that sounds cool until you realize it's slowly draining her of mana like a leaky faucet. She's working on damaged cells one by one, and it's going to take time. But she's confident, so confident, that his mother will wake up by next week. After her healing session, the president practically collapses from exhaustion, sinking to the floor like a rag doll. Kang watches her, curious as she wipes the sweat from her brow. She's literally killing herself to save his mom, and he has no idea why. So, naturally, he asks. With a weak but determined grip, she grabs his hand. She's trembling, her mana nearly depleted, and she whispers, "You have to survive." Green energy shimmers between them, but Kang, always the stoic lone wolf, yanks his hand away. This is a guy who doesn't do emotional hand-holding, thank you very much. But in that moment, the girl figures something out. Kang's beastified transformation has progressed significantly within the blood gate. Ever since Kang escaped one of those cursed red blood gates, the entire world has been thrown into disarray. Turns out all the gates are slowly turning into blood gates, and since Kang escaped, the process has accelerated. The mana flowing from these gates is giving him strength, but there's a bigger, scarier implication. Blood gates aren't just holes in reality. They're passages connected to something on the other side, something that's looking for Kang. The scene shifts to chaos, pure and unfiltered, as red gates erupt all over the city like someone announced a monster flash sale. Skeleton flying beasts and giant bug creatures start pouring out like they've been waiting for this moment their whole lives. The citizens, well, they're not exactly handling it with grace. Screams fill the air as people run for their lives, some stumbling over themselves in sheer panic, while others simply stand frozen, like they're auditioning for a horror movie. One poor guy, staring in utter disbelief at the approaching swarm of nightmare fuel, mutters, "What the hell are these things?" Spoiler alert, buddy. Those are your worst dreams come to life. Cut to the office of the South Korean president, who is having the worst Monday ever. The presidential building is conveniently wrapped in a shield, which looks great from a distance but does absolutely nothing for the president's nerves as he paces around, demanding to know why the Kang Guild isn't answering. His assistant, looking like he just walked through hell himself, drops the bombshell. The entire guild has been annihilated. The president's eyes go wide, his disbelief almost cartoonish. Annihilated? How? The assistant, still holding on to his last shred of composure, admits he has no clue. In a desperate attempt to sound in control, the president suggests getting help from overseas, only to immediately shoot down his own idea like the world's most pessimistic strategist. Self-destruction, he mutters under his breath. Cool, let's skip the help then. He orders martial law, to which his assistant practically sighs, "Sir, the military can't do squat against those things." The president, in full-on denial mode, insists that it's better than nothing, reminding his assistant that they have more hunters. Kang wasn't everything after all. Sure, just what you want to hear when giant monsters are having a field day with your city. As if on cue, we cut to scenes of various guilds stepping up to the plate. The second-ranking Dosa Guild is in action, with Jeon Woojin, the yellow-clad A-rank fighter, and Kang Sihi, an A-rank white-dressed badass, throwing themselves into the chaos. Not far behind, the Vinyl Guild jumps in with Vanillaman in a white hoodie because, apparently, even in the apocalypse, fashion matters. Then there's Esper Woman, who, let's be real, looks like a bootleg version of a certain superheroine shooting lasers from her eyes like it's just another Tuesday. Then comes the Young Hawk Guild, third in line, with a fist fighter named Young Hawk and his buddy Nam Jeon-young, both A-rank, both determined to save the day. It's almost like watching an all-star action movie until the real nightmare arrives. The president's horror knows no bounds when, out of one of the gates, steps something that makes all the other monsters look like toddlers throwing tantrums. A massive green behemoth, standing as tall as the Burj Khalifa, stomps into the scene with all the grace of a wrecking ball. One swing and boom! All those hunters who looked so tough a second ago, smashed like bugs. The city's finest reduced to nothing more than a smear on the ground in one devastating blow. The president stares, wide-eyed, the last flicker of hope in his mind snuffed out. Well, looks like things just went from bad. We're all doomed. Now, our boy Kang steps in. Of course, he can't just stand by and watch this mess. He looks at the guild president and asks, deadpan, "So, since these monsters are appearing because of me, do their deaths count as my fault too?" The guild president, likely regretting every life choice that led to this moment, glares back and asks, "What are you going to do about it?" The answer comes pretty fast. A girl is about to be squashed by a giant monster's palm like a bug under a boot. But nope. Kang slices that monster clean in half, like he's cutting butter, saving her without breaking a sweat. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the guild president's answer. Then Kang, in a rare moment of emotion, reveals the brutal truth. When he died inside the Blood Gate, the gate's mana tried to turn him into a monster. He barely clung to his humanity and thought he'd gained a regeneration ability, but nope. Turns out the mana just won't let him die until he becomes a full-on monster himself. As he tears another creature to shreds, you can see the frustration in his eyes. He just wanted a peaceful life to take care of his mom. But no, these monsters had to come and ruin everything. In the eerie place where all the red gates are connected, a voice echoes, "Is this the boy who caused the crack?" The voice belongs to an undead creature, skeletal and terrifying, with no flesh, just bones and an appetite for chaos. Kang stood there, drenched in sweat and monster blood, staring down the president of the guild with that fiery determination only a man on a mission could possess. "I'll kill all the monsters," he declared with the intensity of a man who's been pushed too far. "Just keep healing my mom from a safe place." The president of the guild, ever so composed, flashed a smile that could convince anyone she wasn't about to run to the hills. "Understood. I'll heal her from the association's underground bunker. So please, fight hard," she replied, exuding confidence that didn't quite match the "I'm gonna hide real good" energy. Kang didn't waste time on sarcasm, though. Not now. Brutality had become second nature. He threw himself into the sea of monsters, tearing through them with his bare hands. Claws, tentacles, and snarling jaws didn't stand a chance as Kang ripped and shredded, blood splattering everywhere. As his hands dug into another beast's chest, he couldn't help but think, "These monsters, they're too familiar." His mind wandered back to the blood gate where he had fought these same creatures endlessly for 5 whole years. 5 years of gruesome, mind-numbing, body-breaking combat. And here they were again, like old friends who never knew when to leave the party. But there's a limit, he reminded himself. Every gate runs out of monsters eventually. I've killed everything in sight. If I keep this up, maybe I can finally live in peace with... Crack! Suddenly, a bullet tore through Kang's skull, bringing his train of thought to a screeching halt. His body staggered forward, but his regeneration kicked in like some twisted version of Wolverine on overdrive. As his vision cleared, he thought, what the hell was that? He turned around, and there they were, some trigger-happy idiots lighting him up with automatic weapons, thinking they had it all figured out. Bullets were pinging off him like they'd somehow missed the memo that he doesn't die. Kang blinked, his body piecing itself back together, bone by bone, muscle by muscle, while his scowl deepened. You've got to be kidding me. An army, he muttered under his breath, watching the soldiers reload with that all-too-familiar sense of false confidence. Clearly, they thought they had it all figured out. One of the soldiers, probably the rookie, hesitated. He didn't kill any people, just monsters. But their captain, ever the meathead, barked back, "Doesn't matter, he's the cause of this whole disaster. We'll tie him up until hunter support arrives." Kang's mind raced. What the hell did I do? Before he could even process the stupidity of the situation, a tank fired a shell straight at him, the blast ringing out like the world's loudest slap in the face. Boom! The thunderous sound was followed by a barrage of shots from every angle. It was like the universe had conspired to throw everything it had at him. Bullets, explosives, maybe even some good old-fashioned insults, all aimed at tearing him apart. Kang tried to block, but it was like trying to stop a hurricane with a paper towel. A massive hole ripped through his chest, and for the first time in a long while he felt it. Pain. Real, soul-shaking pain. His hands instinctively flew to the gaping wound as he shouted, "It hurts!" Tears welled up in his eyes, not from fear, but from the sheer, overwhelming agony. And in between gritted teeth, he screamed, "Stop!" The scene shifts dramatically, the chaotic battlefield falling into an eerie stillness. Kang, battered but unbroken, slowly stands up. The carnage around him. Everything has stopped. And in front of him, a massive red gate looms ominously, like the maw of some unholy beast, waiting to swallow him whole. Suddenly, Kang feels a surge. Black lightning crackles around him, radiating from his body in jagged arcs, like the dark, twisted version of Conqueror's Haki from One Piece. His body trembles with energy, but not the good kind, the dangerous, monstrous kind. His mind flashes back to that warning, a voice laced with concern and caution. President of the guild, her voice echoing in his head, "Be careful, Kang. Since a blood gate has opened, it'll be difficult to suppress the monstrorification." And here he was, standing at the edge of his sanity, teetering on the brink. Behind him, the whole army lay in ruins, defeated by his hands alone. What was left of their bodies looked more like shattered puppets than people. Blood painting the ground in cruel splashes, mixing with the dirt in an obscene mural of death. Kang's chest heaved as he stared at the red gate, but then something caught his eye. A shift, something off. His breath hitched, and for the first time the brutality drained from his expression, replaced by horror. The scene shifts, plunging into the depths of Kang's memory, back to a time when life was cruel in a different way. A distant, haunting recollection of the days he was tormented by the infamous trio of bullies. Kang, beaten down, bloody and broken, lying on the cold concrete of the classroom, with those familiar faces laughing at him. But there, sitting at a distance, was someone, his only friend. blonde-haired, sad-eyed, his classmate, the one who always looked at him with a mixture of pity and frustration. Sometime later, that same friend, furious and confused, confronted him. Taisu and those bastards, just why do they always pick on you? His voice shook with anger, but Kang, slumped and defeated, only sighed and whispered, because I'm easy. But Kang's voice wavered with fear as he added, you'll get hurt at this rate too. Pretend you don't know me at school. His friend's eyes widened, disbelief and shock flooding his face. Grabbing Kang's collar, he barked, Hi, Kang, are you out of your mind? Why would I do that? But Kang only turned his face, silent. That hurt more than any punch ever could. His friend let go, stepping back. Forget it, he muttered, bitterness lacing his words. In the background, Kang's voice narrates with dark, biting sadness. And that's how my childhood friend left me, or so I thought. But in reality, he was collecting evidence, using his ability, the one in his right eye. A superpower like photography, capturing everything, storing it away. The memory shifted again, flashing forward to the day after. After gathering enough evidence, he sent everything to the police, the education office, and the news agencies. But that wasn't the end. No, fate wasn't so kind. The next day, they found him with his right eye, extracted, all because he helped me. The scene morphs into the sterile white walls of a hospital. Kang's friend, bandaged and broken, lay in bed, his empty eye socket covered in gauze, the once bright glow of his ability now gone forever. I don't think I can go to school with you anymore, his friend said softly, the edge of pain in his voice cutting through Kang like a knife. Tears streamed down Kang's face as he trembled with rage and sorrow. Taisu. It was that bastard, wasn't it? I swear, I will. But his friend, weak yet resolute, cut him off. Don't ever try something like that. His smile was small, tired. You lost your ability because of me. Now what? Kang's voice broke, the guilt swallowing him whole. His friend just shook his head, that same sad, resigned smile playing on his lips. Don't worry. There's not much to life anyway. I'll join the army. Maybe I'll find some peace there. The scene snaps back to the present with a gut-wrenching jolt. Kang's blood-soaked hands trembled violently as he knelt amidst the fallen soldiers. And in his grasp, his friend's severed head, the same blonde hair, the same empty eye socket staring back at him. His lifeless gaze seemed to ask the question that tore Kang apart. Why did you do this to me? Kang's body shook uncontrollably, and he collapsed to his knees, his mind crumbling under the weight of it all. Red tears spilled from his eyes, mixing with the blood and dirt below. He screamed, his voice echoing through the silence, filled with sorrow, guilt, and anguish. His hands, once stained with the blood of monsters, were now covered in the blood of his only friend. Kang knelt in the blood-soaked earth, his mind a fractured, crumbling mess. Guilt, rage, and sorrow all waged war in his head. Before he could even gather his thoughts, a massive monster lunged at him, its jaws wide, ready to end him. Kang didn't flinch. He just stood there, silent, until, in the blink of an eye, raw rage erupted. With a furious slash of his bone blade, the beast was torn in two, its body hitting the ground with a sickening thud. But this was only the beginning. From the massive red gate in front of him, more monsters poured out, dozens of them. Fangs, claws, wings, all rushing at him like a tidal wave. Kang didn't hesitate. If anything, the challenge seemed to bring him back from the brink of madness. Fine, he muttered under his breath, his bone blade gleaming in the eerie red light. Let's finish this. Meanwhile, in the sterile, tension-filled office of South Korea's president, the scene unfolding on the screen felt unreal. The president stood with his arms crossed, eyes narrowed, as he watched Kang decimate the monsters in brutal, merciless fashion. "What is that?" the president asked, his voice laced with disbelief. The secretary, looking pale and shaken, swallowed hard before responding. "That is the monster that killed the guild master of Kong Guild and Japan's prime minister." He hesitated, glancing nervously at the screen before continuing. "It's the one responsible for all the calamities, for the blood gates." The president raised an eyebrow, his face tight with stress. "The cause of the blood gates, and we haven't killed it yet?" The secretary stammered. "Well, we tried, sir, but after extensive investigation, we concluded that killing him would, well, it's the only way to stop the gates from spreading." The president's eyes remained glued to the screen, watching Kang cut through monsters like a scythe through wheat. "But why are the monsters fighting him?" His voice was slow, incredulous, as if the absurdity of it all was starting to sink in. The secretary fumbled with his notes. We don't know, sir. What we do know is that even the other monsters can't kill him, and the blood gates have started spreading abroad." He hesitated again. "We can't delay any longer." A heavy silence filled the room. The president pressed his fingers against his temple, trying to soothe the growing headache that threatened to burst from his skull. "What about the domestic hunters?" The secretary's face darkened. "They've all been annihilated, sir." That one word hung in the air like a death sentence. President, now rubbing his temples in frustration, sighed heavily. "Great, just great. We've got one unkillable guy, monsters who want him dead, and now our own hunters are wiped out." He shook his head. "What the hell is going on?" He turned to his secretary, his voice sharp and commanding. "Contact the Foreign Hunter Bureau. I want every capable hunter on this. I don't care where they are or how much it costs." The scene shifts abruptly to China, where a man stands soaked in blood, looking as if he just stepped out of a massacre. His eyes gleamed with interest, the heavy scent of carnage still clinging to him. He tossed his massive spear-like axe to the ground, the force of it cracking the stone beneath his feet. "The monster that wiped out the hunters of Korea and Japan and caused the blood gates," he muttered, a smirk creeping across his face. "Now, this is going to be interesting." His grin widened into something truly sinister as the camera panned out, revealing him in all his terrifying glory. China's #1 triple S rank hunter, Lun Zhuguang. The man who could level mountains with a swing was now eyeing Korea with predatory curiosity. The scene shifts once more, now to the snow-covered landscapes of Russia. In a dimly lit room, a woman lounges casually, staring at the screen with narrowed eyes. Her gaze hardened as she watched Kang tearing through the monsters. Like a god of war, his monstrous form radiating overwhelming power. "What the she exclaimed, leaning forward in disbelief. "What is this thing?" Her voice, tinged with both awe and contempt, echoed in the quiet room. The screen flickered, showing a replay of the carnage Kang left in his wake. It was like watching a force of nature obliterate everything in its path. She stood up, her icy expression tightening as the scene on the screen played on. "Looks like Korea's got themselves a problem," she muttered, her voice low, dangerous. Her name appeared on the screen, Russia's #1 triple S rank hunter, Vladimir Rusana. The woman who had single-handedly repelled invasions from monstrous beasts now seemed eager to face whatever Kang had become. The camera cuts once again, this time to a vast cliffside in the United States. A blonde-haired man stood there, his back to the endless horizon, his eyes closed as though listening to something only he could hear. "Ah, I can hear it," he murmured, his voice soft yet filled with a dark pleasure. The screams of those in pain. Beside him, another figure, eyes wide in confusion, asked, "What? What are you talking about?" The blonde-haired man opened his eyes and a wicked smile crossed his lips. "I need to go." "What?" his companion asked in shock. If you leave, then the war in Russia. But the blonde hunter cut him off without a second thought. The war is over. He lifted his hands, and suddenly, massive dark purple energy surged from him, engulfing the entire landscape in an eerie glow. Huge black wings sprouted from his back, as though he were an angel of death, ready to rain devastation on everything in his path. His companion stood frozen in disbelief as the earth around them trembled. What the hell? The blonde man, tears of black streaming from his eyes, said softly, "Let's go to Korea." As he ascended into the air, his identity was finally revealed. America's #1 triple S rank hunter, Stephen Lucas, the man who had decimated entire armies, and now had his sights set on the chaos unfolding in Korea. And that's it for today. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. See you in the next adventure.